Hi, Terry. Welcome to the show. I appreciate you being here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Having you on the podcast is long overdue, so I'm happy we're doing this.
I appreciate that.
I want to ask you, just kind of kick it right off because I feel like this is important to start with, is what are the biggest differences between active duty finances and guard and reserve finances? Because there are some differences. It's not like completely foreign, but there are some important things.
Well, I think like to connect on things like a pay scale and, rank and things like that, obviously some of those are the same. I think the biggest difference that people always like to talk about, and certainly the most glaring one, is the way you achieve and get to retirement. So I would say retirement points, which is a guard mechanism, differs wildly from the years in service and time and grade with active duty. Typically with the guard, I'm just going to use averages because there's all kinds of weird scenarios that we could talk about. You know, a good year could be as many as 75 points for you. You're going to get 1 point for every day that you have drill or annual training or any periods of activation. And there's obviously there's a few small things like funeral details and other ways that you can accumulate points. But, I think that understanding that it's not always your years of service that gets you to retirement. I mean, you need 20 years. That part is the same, but certainly the retirement points and how you calculate the formula for retirement. That's probably my most common question I get. How do I figure out what my retirement's going to be? And for easy's sake, there's some really great calculators and apps out there. So for anybody who doesn't want to nerd out with the math, you can plug your stuff into some calculators. But overall, you should be able to get your points breakdown from your command and your administrative people within your command, and even within those breakdowns there's some projections done for you. Like on the very last page it'll say, if you retired now, this is what you would get. If you retire in these many years, this is what you get, kind of thing, assuming certain averages. But basically, you can work your magic and accumulate your points, and that's going to get you the most robust retirement possible.
What is the formula for people that it's what your points divided by three? Is it three? Why do I want to say
Yeah,
380?
360.
360. Okay, I was close.
You're going to take basically, for Garden Reserve, you're going to take 2.5%. And now just imagine you have some parentheses, and it's going to be your total points divided by 360. And then you're going to times that by your maximum longevity pay at that rank. So if you were to look at a pay scale, and let's just say you were in '05 over 20, you can look and see what that dollar amount is and the pay scale for that. If that's going to be your maximum pay with longevity, like at your years of retirement, that's the number you plug into there. And that's going to pop out actually a monthly amount. So if you want to know your yearly, you obviously just times that by 12, but that'll give you your monthly retirement pay. 2.5 times your total points divided by 60 times your maximum longevity pay at that rank. So the one thing that I hear or get questioned a lot, because it's points based, do you need those 3 years, at time and rank? Like, does that help a guard person? So that's a really good question. And I think it confuses a lot of people. That amount is going to be your highest 36 years. Like, it's going to take that particular number. So yes, staying 3 years in a rank is going to benefit you even as a guard member for that particular formula. Is it necessary? Not necessarily. It's not also necessary with active duty. But if you want to maximize your retirement, then yes, because they're going to look at your highest 36, did I say years? Months, highest 36 months of pay. So if you wanted to do the math and say, hey, I really want to retire and I've got 2 years as an '05, and it's going to calculate 1 year as an '04, you can do that math and see what it is. It's going to impact you. It's not going to be remarkable, but it's going to impact you, and it could matter to you or it could not. So, but yes, that is definitely something. And I think that you know, the other common thing I get as far as differences with guard and active duty as it relates to money and things that people kind of mess up on is when you get your money. So I think it's becoming more common that people understand that, you could hit your 20 years. I'll just use my husband as example. This year, or this month rather, he will be in for 32 years. So I get this all the time. Can he retire? Yes, of course he can retire. Like, he's been in 32 years. Nobody is like, you know, making him. But he's 51. So he can retire now, and he will, in general terms, have to wait until 60 to receive any sort of pension from the military. And what we know now is like you can back it out. So for 90 days of consecutive service in specific combat areas or specific situations related to war, you can back out those days. So you might be able to actually get your money at 58 and a half or 58 and 3 months or whatever your formula works out to be. But generally speaking, you're not pulling retirement until age 60, as opposed to active duty that can serve their 20, retire, and ideally get money the next month if everything goes on time. But
Yes. That's a big shocker for a lot of people that maybe go active duty to guard or reserve. Like they're not tracking. Yeah, you can't get your retirement. I mean, but you have a lot of active duty time that can then be applied, and if it's
yeah,
in like combat zones and stuff like that.
right.
You mentioned the formula, and I just thought about this. The blended retirement system, you would multiply it by 2 instead of 2.5. But I just
Sorry,
realized it's
let's
like,
clarify that.
oh yeah, no, but it got me thinking that there's probably not a lot of reserve guard that are in the blended retirements. I mean, the new, but in calculating points and stuff like that, most people were grandfathered probably into the old system,
It's
or
really
you.
funny you say that, because in my mind, we're not seeing, anybody coming in is probably going to choose that BRS, right?
You know,
So,
yeah, I think they have to now.
but I think that, I don't know, in my mind, there's fewer high three people. That's funny that you think differently. Where I live and interact with people is, I'll say, is a very uncommon guard scenario. We live near the headquarters in our state. So we're surrounded by people with longevity and rank. That's not typical for the guard. So I'm looking, on any given day, I could be around somebody who's been in 30, 40 years. And so the idea, if you're always around that, is you think everybody's like that, right? But that's not true. If we go to my husband's unit, there's younger folks in there who are all now in the blended retirement system. So they're going to have a different formula. So I'm sorry, I should have clarified that too.
No, no, I got what you were saying. Just think, I mean, there are both
Oh,
types now in
yeah.
the calculation, but I was just thinking that I would think it would be more people that are using the old system in the calculation versus two. But
Well, at this moment, but I could see in 10 years that being something different,
yeah,
right? Yeah. There's one other point that I didn't want to miss, and that is healthcare. There's been a lot of changes in healthcare availability for Guard and Reserve. On a positive note, I would say, like that it is available, where in the past it wasn't always. And so if you've got, basically an M-Day, which is what the Army calls, I think they call it drill status guard, like Air Force is DSG, Army calls it M-Day, meaning like a traditional guardsman, the one weekend a month, 2 weeks out of the year. They still have access to TRICARE. And so they have access to this low cost, high quality healthcare plan that could be cheaper than their civilian counterparts. So I do see a lot of people who take advantage of that. And I'll tell you this one quick story. I've used it in the past, so sorry to repeat, but I'm walking with my girlfriend whose husband is in the Guard with my husband. And she was excited that he got his 20-year letter. I'm like, oh, congratulations. That's great. And I know that they use TRICARE. So he does have civilian work in our area. And I was always kind of surprised that they use TRICARE over his civilian work, because it's a rather large group health insurance plan that he could be part of. But for them, TRICARE was a better choice, and that's okay. And she's like, we're just excited for him to get that check every month. And I'm like, well, how old is he? And she's like, he's 52. And I'm like, okay. And he's never deployed. So I'm like, he's not getting a check anytime soon. So going back to that point of retiring, but also he's going to transition from the TRICARE you have now to TRICARE Retired Reserve, which is quite an expensive endeavor compared to what they're paying now. So it's going to shoot up to well over $1,000 for them versus this nominal amount that they're paying now. And she didn't know. And he had kind of put his papers in already to be done. Right. And it was like this huge thing. So, number one, I mean, like, what he was going to get in retirement was going to pale in comparison to his drill pay. So that's also one thing. But the fact that he wouldn't be able to get it for years to come and they'd have an increased cost of healthcare, he was able to go back and he ended up staying in the Guard because it just wasn't financially appropriate for them to leave. And so I felt a little bit surprised that she didn't know those things. So where are we failing in the system that this family who'd been in for 20 years didn't understand these things? And how many other people are there like them?
Yeah, that is
So
crazy.
it was super crazy, but I guarantee he's not alone and that they're not alone. And, there's not as much water cooler talk in the Guard, right? They're not together all the time. And so the things that they commiserate on and learn and grow like you would with active duty really is just one weekend a month sometimes for some of these people. And it was for him. Like that's how he moved through his Guard experience was, he did his one weekend a month. So not that he didn't do enough, he did enough to stay in, but it wasn't his goal to do lots of extra. And so he didn't have the same exposure and availability to information that I think is expected or assumed. I'll say assumed.
Yes. That's a really good point about they're doing their one weekend a month, and there isn't so much shooting the breeze as there is when you're on active duty, where you guys are just like waiting, standing by to stand by. You're sitting somewhere waiting to go on the field. You're sitting somewhere waiting to
Right.
like get processed for whatever it is. And so there is a lot of time to chit chat. I know that service members won't call it that, but that's really what it is. There's some chit chat going on. And then also too with spouses, there's a lot of events. So there's more chit chat on active duty that you're talking about these things. And
And think of it this way, my husband drills 5.5 hours away from me.
wow,
So I
you don't
don't
know anybody there.
know those wives. I don't even really know those soldiers.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Yeah, so it is very separated. And so and I mean, your communication has to be strong. But then I always say this, a lot of things could be saved by just signing up for the base tour, or you initially get there. And again, Guard and Reserve maybe not do it the same way, but on active duty, like there is a base tour where they'll show you every resource on that installation. There is, an information hub where there's saying all of these things or getting on the email list. Just get the emails where they're sharing some of this information. So I think it goes both ways. Like people could do better, but then service members can also and their families do
Be
better.
more proactive. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also want to say, like, when you have a drill weekend and they have a checklist, just like everybody else, of stuff they have to get done and need to get done, or training that's mandated to them, a lot of times this financial stuff kind of falls by the wayside and there's just not time in there. So for as much as financial readiness is a huge component to mission readiness, the real life scenario is there's not time to do it. So either you're going to learn how to use your weapon and clean your weapon, or you're going to learn about the TSP. And one of them will save your life and one of them won't. And so they're erring on the side of that versus this. And I'm not like necessarily opining whether what's more important, like from whatever perspective you want to look at it, but it's just the truth of the matter is they don't have as much time. Now let's just use Florida as an example. Now you have a hurricane and now they've gone on state active duty for 3 months. You've just given up 3 months of time of things they had to accomplish at drill for the year. So you think they're squeezing some stuff in there about finance? Not really. Here's a link, watch a video.
Yeah. Again, like they need you to be proactive,
But you don't know what you don't know.
right.
And that's part of it. And like that's true for all of us in lots of different ways. Like you don't know what you don't know. And unless you make a mistake or you're thrown into a scenario, you really could be missing something. And there's a lot of opportunity for that with service members. So
Yeah, that's a really good point. We talk about transition is a big place where finances can get messed up. And for Guard and Reserve, they're going on and off orders. And so are there some financial mistakes that you see that people make during that key time where they're vulnerable?
yeah, I think, the first thing that comes to mind may not be the most important thing is like when I'm thinking about orders, which is not always true for National Guard, right? Because they could be on Title 32 or Title 10. Those are very different with very different financial benefits or other long-term benefits for the Guard. But I always think about a moment in my own personal life that was a surprise and a mistake for my own personal financial planning. So my husband's in Afghanistan. He was involved in a situation that he was going to leave that country. And the minute he left that country, he was no longer in a combat zone, and all of a sudden his pay was taxed. And so it was of no planning on his part that he had to leave, or that situation had presented itself. But all of a sudden it was different, and I didn't know that. And so it's a whole different thing when a whole chunk of it's coming out for taxes. So I think understanding what a combat zone is, when that applies, and then what actually counts as coming off is okay. I think one other interesting part to make note of is the TSP contribution. So I think in our world, I feel like this gets talked about a lot as planners and financial counselors, but for service members who maybe are deploying and could potentially be in a combat zone where they have, tax-free or other benefits to them, and they want to load up, their TSP, front loading that could have dire consequences for you in the back end. So the matching comes in a pay period. It doesn't come per year. So if you are maxing out your TSP early on, you will miss out on the BRS match later on in the year. So that's a transition thing that I feel like we talk about a lot and we see a lot. And great that people are super excited to save and dump into the TSP, but you have to be systematic about it and understand the rules of that benefit.
Yeah, that is a really good point. Also, too, about coming in and out of a hostile fire hazardous duty area that that's going to change your finances. And if you have been planning, because that's what a lot of people do, like, okay, hey, we know you're going to be gone for 6 months, a year, you're planning out finances. And I know for us, it was always like, okay, well, childcare is going to increase because I will need a break. I will need to go to the doctor without 2 kids in tow or whatever it is. And so you are counting on that money in whatever else you need help with, like whether it's like, hey, I'm traveling to meet you because you're going to come home, after 6 months or whatever it is. But if you aren't tracking the changes, especially I have known people that leave during a deployment to come back to the States for like a month-long training just to go back to that deployment. And so they came out of the area for a month and then go back. So you're right, it does change. So being mindful and everybody knowing if this changes, then so does our money.
Yeah. And even things like, it may not be giant sums of money, but, family separation pay and BAH, like if you're home or if you're more than so many days around your spouse, like you don't get those pays. I think, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about SICRA and the Service Members Relief Act. So certainly that's something that impacts Guard members too, and their availability to it. So we see a lot of people maintaining high interest rates even when they qualify for using that and can reduce those interest rates to 6%. So transitioning in and out of that, I think, is important. Like they don't always catch you on the back end, but if you get in, if it's debt you had prior to your active time, it qualifies in there. So if you've got something sitting at 11%, you have 8 million things going on before you go into an active duty status. So it may not be on your mind, but put it on the to-do list, because if that could save you 5% in this example, it's going to be worth your time to do that, and could be a huge thing. And then I think, lastly, I would say things like, just like active duty, when they're not always fluid with paying you. So your transition back from active duty to regular drill status, there could be issues in your LES and your pay. It could take you a couple pay cycles to get that drill. So if you come back and you go to drill and you're planning on that money, just be prepared that it might not be there for a month or two. And that's something I don't think service members think about. Like, you just imagine everything's going to be fluid. Likewise, when you go back to your civilian employer, a lot of times you have to work for a week or two before you get that paycheck, depending on how they pay you. So you're not always coming right back into the same pay cycle that you left in. And that's going to require some different steps on your part to be prepared and kind of fill in those gaps.
Yes, that's a really good point of them not taking advantage of all the benefits that they are owed through their service. And that makes a huge difference. If you're, can get it reduced over 6 months or a year that you're mobilized, that can really move the needle. And I know a lot of people are deploying in order to pay down debt. And so they're counting on that additional money in order to get out of debt while they're gone. So I think any changes to that can throw off the plan, especially if it's shortened by a great deal.
Right, right.
What about, you mentioned there about civilian pay? Do you see that a lot of people have issues with, because some people are making more as a civilian than they are if they're mobilized to active duty, which can really like throw off their just baseline if they're by themselves, their budget, but having a family and losing income, how does that work?
That's true. I would say it probably is less frequent than those who make more on active duty when we're thinking about the force as a whole. But I had a guard spouse and I took her out for coffee because she was very nervous about her husband deploying. And he was a colonel in the guard. And we're sitting there and she's like, I just don't know how people live like this. And I'm like, oh, you don't know? Well, to put it into perspective, her husband was a neurosurgeon. Okay. So yeah, okay, now it makes a little bit more sense, even though my first thought was exactly like what your face had. You're like, oh, okay. Lots of people can laugh out colonel's pay. Like that's actually pretty good, you know?
Yeah.
But in her world, it was significant. And I mean, really significant, like more than $500,000 difference in a year. And he was going to be deployed for a year. So in her mind, she needed to think about money differently. So yes, that's a real and true problem. I would say it's probably not as common as people who make more. Like you said, they're going on deployment to pay off debt. I think that's much more a common scenario. But one other thing that could throw that off and maybe tip the scales a little bit, and it's different with Guard and Reserve or Guard and Reserve versus active duty, is that Guard and Reserve are able to have that VA disability rating while they're actually serving. They can't double dip with that money, which is where this leads into your point. If you are somebody who's getting VA compensation as a guard or reservist, they will kind of subtract out your drill days from that. So certainly when you go at, like, let's just say you're getting, I'm going to make this up, $2,000 a month because you have a disability rating
From the VA.
from the VA,
Okay.
right? And you go to drill, they're going to take out those 2 or 3 days of drill from your VA pay. But if you go active duty, you will forfeit all of that VA pay. So
Like being activated for a year?
when you go on orders, like say you go deploy for a year and you typically get VA compensation as part of your financial world in your regular life, you will lose that money on deployment because you're not allowed to get VA pay while you're serving on active duty. So
That makes sense.
that's more of a problem for Guard and Reserve than it is for active duty because most people on active duty don't file that paperwork or do it until they're retired or getting ready to retire. They're not getting that compensation. But there are a lot of Guard and Reserve that are currently receiving VA disability while they still serve.
That's interesting you say that because a good example, I think, of the situation that people might know is Dakota Meyer, the Medal of Honor recipient. He was probably at minimum getting some type of disability for PTSD. I don't know. I'm just speculating. But he recently, I think, joined the Guard. And I think it's the Guard. He's a Marine. What is that? Is that Guard?
Guard. He could be in the reserves.
Yeah, reserves.
Yeah.
And so that makes sense. Like he's not on active duty, but he's drilling and doing all the things. I think a lot of his has to do with recruitment. If I don't know what he's working for, but that makes sense. Then he's just that month doesn't get all of it.
Right. He'll just back out however many, whatever the drill is for that day. And there's a form at the VA that you complete, you send to them when you know what your schedule's like and say, okay, I plan on having, 50 active duty days this year. And those systems now talk. It's not super great, but they talk. And so, those service members will get a letter saying, okay, we see that you were on, they call it active duty. Guard and Reserve would not use those terms, but the VA does. What they mean is you were on drill status. So we're going to take away those days of your VA compensation and you'll only be paid for 27 days or 26 days or whatever the case may be. But you still do get something in a month. But now parlay that into somebody who's going overseas for a year on deployment, you're getting nothing during that time. You'll get nothing.
That's good though. The systems talk. I didn't realize that. So I think that's great for people that want to come off of active duty, but yeah, that you could get something. But yeah, the year you're going to be gone. And I think that's fair. Like there's something that they've worked out. That's great news. So news to me. I want to ask for people that are feeling behind, or they get overwhelmed with the uncertainty. And maybe I would think too, people that are new to the Guard and Reserve, like, what's some steps that they can, or a good first step that they can take to kind of get a little bit more control of their money or their budgeting, or just not feel overwhelmed?
I think a lot of the things like that we would say to them are even the same things we would say to a regular civilian person. Like, you want to set up personal systems that allow you to have a path to success. I would say the first system is a good rule of thumb, like you pay yourself first. And an emergency fund is a must. So these aren't unlike regular civilian, I'm not throwing out groundbreaking ideas to you with this, but I think when it comes to a service member and the ambiguity that sometimes goes with service, especially with Guard and Reserve, because you don't know when there's going to be a state emergency. You don't know when you're going, like all these things, those things are emergent in most cases, right? Like, I think my husband was gone for almost like up to 3 months last year doing hurricane stuff. So that means he's not doing his civilian job. That could mean a reduction in pay or a change in pay. So I think just doing some of those standard good financial hygiene steps, keeping your debt to a minimum, and then, knowing when to seek help and get advice from somebody else, I think is also, and there are free and available resources to Guard members, just like there are to active duty service members. Military One Source, Personal Financial Manager. You may be geographically not located with them, but if you called a PFM in your state, they would come and do a brief at your unit. They just want the call, and or they'll talk to you over the phone, or if you are physically with them, you can obviously sit down. Those are services you can access for free. But I think some of those typical good financial habits that we would employ with a civilian also work in this case, because we are talking about citizen soldiers. So I think you kind of do have to start there. And for anybody who doesn't feel knowledgeable about the benefits that are available to them, ask questions, because there's a lot of them. And I don't think that friend that I was walking with really understood that her life would be severely impacted if he retired and what that was going to mean to them. So a little bit of shame on all sides, like shame on them for not knowing, shame on the Guard for not doing a better job of making sure their people know. Like, not about pointing fingers, but just understanding like there are resources out there and it's okay to ask and it's okay to get help. But keeping your personal life in order, I think is super important. And then just like I would say with an active duty person, making sure you have somebody who understands it. So where we see a lot that a spouse in active duty is, the chief financial officer of that household, a lot of times you have more equity in that with a Guard person. It really might be the service member who takes the lead, because their time isn't as pressed as it, in the active duty world. Like, they're here, they're doing their civilian job every day kind of thing, but then they go and the wife doesn't know. So I remember going over to a friend's house and she hadn't opened up her mail since her husband left, and he was on like these 6-month orders. And I was like, what's going on over here? And she's like, well, Henry takes care of those. I'm like, well, Henry's not here,
Yeah.
so you still have to like, work your life together with your significant other in the Guard, because you just don't know when those emergencies are going to pop up. You may know about deployments, and the Guard deploys quite often, quite frankly, but the state active duty could come pretty quick. Or just, here in Florida, we've got Guard people all over the place, right? They're in DC, they're in our correction facilities, they're at the border, they're down in the Key, like they're everywhere. And those people are on different sets of orders, but typically it's like a state active duty situation and you just don't know when it's going to pop up. So more than just you needs to be in the know if you're the service member who is the chief financial officer in your life.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't think about the difference between active duty. You're right. Like, there are a lot of spouses that are just, that's what they do because there needs to be some type of continuity, and it's the opposite for Guard and Reserve. So that's interesting. That could see, and it's like nobody wants to do it. It's extra work. Like,
I
it's
like
just,
to do it. I'm a nerd like that. I like doing the money.
but it's just like sometimes it's like annoying. Like, okay, there's a new problem here. Got to sort this out or whatever. Make phone calls, stuff like that. But like, it's still like work has to be done. So I agree with, like, you got to open the mail, you got to like face the day on change. That's really what it is. It's change, and nobody likes change.
And
Okay.
I'm chatting with a Guard member who's literally like the CFO of his company. He probably does the money. Morgan
Yes,
should
yes.
probably do the money, but he's on deployment now, so he's gone.
Yeah.
And I often wonder how life is going at that house right now. So, yeah, that happens.
Yes. No, that's a good point. Well, I want to switch gears now and ask you a couple of quick random questions to ask everybody. First off, what is one resource or tool that you use that makes your life or your work easier? And I've had to remove, you can't say AI because that's what everybody has been saying.
Oh, well, you're definitely not getting AI from me. I don't use AI enough, I think, to probably streamline my processes. I'm going to actually give a little plug for you because this is a resource I learned from you years ago at an AFCPE conference where it was like during COVID, so we were all virtually meeting. I can't remember if you had a little segment or if it was like in a chat room or whatever, but you introduced me to Calendly, and now I use it as my system for scheduling. And now it has new features where you can do it for note taking and things like that. That is a little bit more AI. I'm not going to talk about it because you said no, but I don't use it, but they have that function. And I know some people who even use it for invoicing and payment. So I haven't segued into that, but to me, it is a really, really great way to just streamline rather than going back and forth with somebody here. Just take my link, it'll pop into my calendar, and you can find the time that works best for you. And you already know my availability because it's in there. So I think that's a lifesaver for me. I use it a lot.
That is a good one. I love that it was a value to you. And it's funny you say that because just at Mill MoneyCon, I was talking to somebody about starting their coaching business. I was like, just get Calendly because you can also share that on LinkedIn. Like, hey, here's how you book with me. So you don't
Right.
need a website. You
Yeah.
just kind of gotta get a paying client. I now use it. I do for my business coaching. Do payment, so you have to pay before you book my time. But it's really great, like when you're starting out, to just have that handled. So I like that. I haven't used the AI note thing, so I'll have to look at that. I feel like I need to refresh myself on the benefits of Calendly, even though I have it.
Yeah. Well, I'm not over the idea that it's supposed to be a confidential process and something's taking notes.
Yes.
So
I I
I'm
prefer the heads up. A lot of people do that to me. They add a note taker to a scheduled meeting with me and they don't tell me. And so this thing shows up. I finally figured out what it is. But if I'm going to, like, even recording this, I make sure people know the moment I'm telling you I'm hitting record, like we're recording now. So, cause yeah, it does make a little like
sure it's
verbatim.
fine. I'm sure there's safeguards in place. I haven't explored them, but I don't know. I'm a paper and pen girl. So
Yes.
I take my notes. It helps me learn. It helps me remember. But Calendly, it just streamlines that process. And so not everybody comes my way through LinkedIn or even my website. Sometimes they'll get my number and text me and say, hey, so and so shared your information. I'd like to schedule. And that way I can just send a link back by text and it's done. It's like, one text and done kind of thing. So it's great. I like it. And it's really kind of inexpensive. So
Yes, yes. For a long time, I used the free version until I needed like some other things. But okay, well, I'll be sure to put a link to that in the show notes for everybody that is listening. All right, what is your favorite book right now, or your favorite book of all time?
So I'm definitely like a book nerd. I'm currently reading like 5 different books. That's probably my max I can do before my brain gets all jumbled up between them. But
That's impressive. Five, yeah.
they all are different storylines, so it's pretty good. But I would say like as far as like a fiction book, and I'm rereading it for the third time right now. It's called Makes Me Want to Holler by Nathan McCall. And it's a great book, and it's going to be a book club discussion because I'm in a book club because that's what us nerds do. But I like to toggle it with something that helps me learn and grow, or something that is more geared toward improving my life and my business or my skill set. And so this is a shameless plug, but I have it with me because I really like this book. This is Doug Norman's book.
Oh, I was like, I recognize that book. Yes, yes. Doug Norman's. Yes. Okay.
So I like The Simple Path to Wealth, and this is the Military Guide to Financial Independence. And it's a super easy read, and he's got all these tools inside of there. So for service members, to me, this is like a no-brainer. But I think the other thing I'm reading right now is The Covenant of Water. It's it's not the easiest book to read, but it's really good so far. So I'm all about books. So if anybody else has got some suggestions, I'll take them because I like to read.
Yes. Well, I will put a link to all of those in the show notes for everybody interested in reading them. Those are all Great ideas. All right, now it is time for my favorite part of the podcast, which is game time. And in honor of your visit today, we're going to play Guess Who. So I'm thinking of a famous person, and I'm going to give you 3 clues one at a time. And if you guess correctly after the third clue, you win bragging rights that you won game time on the MILMO Show. Are you ready for this? Clue number 1. I grew up in a family of 12 children and was raised in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. Clue number 2. I helped create a program that has gifted millions of free books to children around the world. Clue number 3. Did I say clue number 2? Anyway, that was 2. This is 3. My brain is fried. Okay, last clue. I'm known for big hair, country music, and saying it costs a lot of money to look this cheap. Who am I?
Dolly Parton.
That is right. I was thinking you would get it. I didn't know where you got it, though. With the 12 children raised in the Smoky Mountains. Did you get it after the free books, or was it the big hair and country music?
So I had an idea with the books. I didn't know she had 12 siblings.
She comes from a very large family, and she used to bathe in the river.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really great Smoky Mountain, right?
Yes. So, well, you got it. So you have bragging rights that you won game time on the MILMO Show. I appreciate you playing and being on the podcast. Can you tell everybody listening where they can learn more about you and the work you're doing?
Yeah, so if you're interested in connecting with me or learning more about my work, dailyfinancialsuccess.com is my website. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I wouldn't say hit up Instagram or Facebook, not really super active on those, sorry, but definitely LinkedIn and my website. And I would love to chat with anybody more.
That's awesome. I will link to that in the show notes for everybody. Thank you again, Terri. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.